Okay, hi there. This is Catherine Lundoff. I'm the publisher at Queen of Swords Press, and we are live from DreamHaven Books in Minneapolis tonight. And I'm going to be talking about running a small press, specifically about Queen of Swords Press, which is my own small publishing company, and some of the things that went into setting that up. You can send me questions in the chat on the side, and I'll be happy to answer what I can or get back to you about things later. I do actually have a mask here, but there is nobody within 10 feet of me at the moment, so I've taken it off. I also have two different kinds of hand sanitizer, so for people worried about that, I'm covered. All the books that I'll be handling tonight are from my own stash of books, so if you want to purchase things from DreamHaven, no worries. Anything I'm breathing on is from my own stuff and it comes home with me. Um, so, and that said, I've put in the link to DreamHaven Books up in the chat, and it would be great if people ordered books from them. They do carry all of Queen of Swords Press titles, and I will be talking about some of those. So you can order our books direct from them, and that would be terrific. We'd really like it if you did that. They are my local bookstore. They are the closest bookstore to our office. And as many of you know, Uncle Hugo's and Uncle Edgar's was destroyed a couple of weeks ago. DreamHaven was also hit during the aftermath of the riots. They were vandalized and burglarized, and there was an attempted arson, which very fortunately failed. But it's certainly a good reminder that we got to keep our bookstores going and healthy, and that the Twin Cities are book towns, and we love our bookstores, so we gotta support our indie bookstores. So without further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that went into setting up Queen of Swords Press and where things are at right now. So the press is now it's 3.5 years old. Not even about. It really is 3.5 years old. And I started it 2 years before I actually launched it. So 3.5 years is from the launch date. And I had been traditionally published previously by another publisher. I did 5 books with him. I was traditionally published by another publisher before that. I have written a great deal of short fiction, so I've worked with a number of traditional small press publishers and a few larger ones. I hadn't really done a lot of indie work before I started that, so that was kind of a ramp up for learning how to do things. And it took me about 2 years in just the planning stages. And part of that is also that I work full time and I write and so forth. So I have a day job in IT, and that's been with various employers while all this stuff has been going on. And so it's character building, but that's another sidebar. So I started out with doing things like getting my domain names, getting my website set up, getting my ISBNs, doing all of the planning stuff, getting a logo, going through all of the different things that I was going to need to do in order to get a press started. I met with my small business attorney, who is somebody I know through local fandom. I met with an accountant. I talked to somebody about branding and marketing and kind of worked through a lot of that stuff ahead of time, long before I decided to actually put a book out. And what I decided I was going to do was the first year I was going to start with my own backlist. Reason being, I had it sitting around. So the very first book that came out from Queen of Swords Press is a collection called Out of This World, Queer Speculative Fiction Stories, which is a collection of my short fiction with LGBT or Q protagonists. And 15 stories. So many of them had been published elsewhere, but were currently out of print. A couple of them had appeared in a previous collection, which was also very much out of print. So there was a lot of stuff where, it's like, okay, the stuff is just sitting here. I should use it for something. So I started out with that, and it gave us a little bit of a lift to get out there and start talking to people and start, talking to reviewers and building lists of things, so that we had things we could really work with. After that, I republished in a new edition of my menopausal werewolf novel, Silver Moon, And Silver Moon is about a woman who discovers that as she enters menopause, she turns into a werewolf. It's been pretty popular. It's been a finalist for several awards. It has had nice reviews a bunch of places. So this is a new edition. It's got a new cover. I made some substantial changes to the plot. I changed character names. I did things like that. It's also a little bit longer than the original book that I put out. So the first year I did those two, and then I did 2 ebook only collections of short fiction under my pseudonym, because there is a pseudonym for Catherine Lundoff as well. When I first started out, I wrote erotica and erotic romance, and I don't write that under my own name anymore. And so Emily Byrne was born, and so we have a couple of Emily Byrne collections because, again, there was a lot of stuff sitting around. And, so that was the first 4 books. And year 2, I started looking at getting some more things out. So we decided that it was time for an Emily Byrne novel. It's called Medusa's Touch. And it was something that was originally written for a medium-sized publisher that kind of went boom in very dramatic fashion. But amongst the things that I figured out how to do during the course of this was I've been working with somebody who's a book designer and book artist who lives in White Bear Lake. And Terry Roy, who does all of my interiors and a lot of my covers, does these fabulous interior design things. So this is set in the far future. It's set in outer space. There are aliens and pirates and pilots rather, not pirates in this one, and a lot of wacky hijinks that ensue. And she just did a really amazing job with the design on this. And so I've worked with her for every other print book that I put out since. So one of the things that came up that first year was that I had, a number of years ago, at Worldcon, met an author named Alex Axe, who then had a different name. But Alex had this really, really fabulous series of linked steampunk novellas. And they were terrific. And they came out with a small publisher that didn't quite know what to do with them. And they were collected in very odd ways. And they had terrible covers. And literally 2 weeks after the publisher released them, they went under. It may not have been 2 weeks, but it was pretty close. So I had said during the course of this particular Worldcon, hey, if these become available again, I would definitely like to talk to you about publishing through Queen of Swords Press. And so Alex rang me up and said, okay, this seems to be, taking off here. Are you still interested in these? And I said, boy, yes. So I changed the packaging, changed the cover, rearranged the stories in a way that made more sense, pulled out some of the filler material, and we have Murder on the Titania. So Murder on the Titania and Medusa's Touch came out there's one more book that came out in 2018. I should mention that, like I said, the first year I put out 4 books, which was a wee bit too many. And I learned from that. It was really exhausting, and I had this completely nutty fall where, like, in a row, I got the stomach flu a couple of times and norovirus, and then I fell in a parking lot and I got a concussion, and then I had the stomach flu again. So I recognized that I was perhaps putting a little too much stress on myself. So the next year I figured, okay, I'm going to do 3 books. 3 books should be sustainable. So Murder on the Titania was one of the books that came out in 2018. As you can see, there is a shiny, sticker on it. And that is because it was a Colorado Book Award finalist, which was very exciting for all of us. It unfortunately did not win, even though I think it richly deserved to. But these are terrific stories. They're rollicking adventures set in an alternate Colorado with land pirates and dirigibles and all kinds of, nifty, fun things. So I highly recommend them. So then, after that came out, that came out in time for both WisCon and the Pride Story Bundle. Story bundles are collections of books that we've been pulling together with Story Bundle, which is a corporate entity. And we Melissa Scott did the last few. I took it over this year. And what the story bundles are a collection of books by either LGBTQ authors or about LGBTQ characters. And it's been a huge lift. There's usually about 10 authors participating, anywhere from 10 to 12 to 13 books. And it's been just a great financial boon. Most of the Queen of Swords expenses have been paid either from my savings, which comes from my job, from book sales, and from the story bundles, which have been a big boost. I also have a Patreon where I'm serializing a novel in progress, and I occasionally do other things that also raise money for the press. Now that I'm more established, I'm also doing things like participating in big multi-author sales once or twice a year, and that also really helps boost sales. Otherwise, part of what I've been up to is gradually building on the year before. So each year I try to add a different sales platform and reach out to a different audience. So 2018 was the year we started doing steampunk and pirates. So I had edited or co-edited a couple of anthologies with my previous publisher, and I sort of wanted to try my hand at it again. So I looked at a couple of the projects I was hoping to do that first year, and it was obvious that they weren't going to quite work out when I was hoping they would work out. So I decided that one of the things that I could really stand to read a lot of was pirate stories. So I put out a call for a collection of fantastical pirate stories, open to science fiction, any orientation. My own work features queer women. Alex's book also features one of the protagonists is a queer woman. But for Scourge of the Seas of Time and Space, which is what the pirate book is called, I wanted to kind of broaden it. I also wanted to try to get, pirates are one of those fascinating things because they're a completely international phenomenon. You get them everywhere. You get them at every different point in history. If you've got a body of water, sooner or later you've got some form of piracy going on. And, which is fascinating. So I asked specifically for international contributors. I, kept it very, very broad. And I ended up getting about 100 submissions. And they were from, all told, yes, I know I just touched my face, hand sanitizer's here. And I ended up selecting stories from authors from like 12 different countries. And it was this really, really great opportunity to bring in people who were award-winning, reasonably well-known. I got, people like Jen Hale, who's been up for the Lambda a couple of times. I got an author who's a youth librarian from LA, and it's the very first story he's ever published. I got, several authors of color who are on like their first or second story. Just amazing, amazing stuff. Locally, I got a great story from author Michael Merriam, who lives here in town. Well, here in town, by which we mean Hopkins, which is further out west. But Michael's got a story in here too. John Cannon, who writes for a number of very popular web serials. So just, a bunch of different authors participated in it. And it got a lovely review in Publishers Weekly. It made it on to the American Library Association's Rainbow List, they're over the Rainbow List, which is their recommended reading for adult readers of LGBTQ work. And, it's just kind of chugged along famously. The cover is by the same artist who did my logo. And once again, Terry did the interior, so you have these marvelous things like a pirate ship with my logo in place of the skull and crossbones. So that actually did quite well. And in the course of, Alex and I talked about putting out another book of the Captain Ramos and Sim stories, which are what we're calling the Murder on the Titania, and its sequel, Wireless. And Wireless came out in 2019, and it's, it basically continues the adventures pretty much where they left off. You can read it standalone. They're still really fun, even if you do read them that way. But they're just like really, really terrific and a really great time. And it does not have a shiny award sticker because the current awards don't give out shiny award stickers. But it is a finalist for the Midwest Book Awards, which will be given out on the 27th. So fingers crossed that Alex sweeps it. Again, great stories, lots of fun. I should note that Alex also writes as Alex Axe for Angry Robot and for Book Riot. Nope, sorry, for Angry Robot as Alex Wells, and then for Book Riot as Alex Axe. So you can find a bunch of their stuff out there, and it's all terrific, and it's all well worth tracking down. The Alex Wells books for Angry Robot are about like outer space coal miners, essentially. And so they're very, very prescient and very now kind of books. So I recommend tracking those down. So did 2 books in 2019. The other one was a collection of my horror and dark fantasy stories called Unfinished Business. And Unfinished Business is the launch of a line of what I'm calling minis. As you can see, it's a fairly thin book. So these are clocking in at around 40,000 words. So they're about novella length, or, the series of linked short stories, basically. And one of the reasons I started doing these is that as the years went by, the first year I didn't do a ton of event tables. By the second year, I was doing a bunch more event tables. By 2019, I was doing outdoor festivals with the tent and the whole 9 yards. I should note that I also added an assistant, so I am now a person and a half company with artists and so forth contracted out. And so we had, wacky good times, like being up in a park in St. Cloud when there was a monsoon, and we had to, fling our bodies upon the table to hold the tent down, and other nifty things. And then when I finally got everything out to the car was in 1.5 feet of water. So yeah, learned a lot. Anyway, so doing lots more live events, lots more tables. And I often share tables with local authors and with other publishers. So Mike Merriam is one of them. There's a couple of other folks who I've shared tables with. I've also shared with Blind Eye Books. We've done a big event out in Las Vegas, which is a big queer women in media convention. And that one it's at a casino, and it's huge. And you definitely want to be somewhere where they're handing out free tequila samples, because people walk back from the tequila booth, slap credit cards down on the table, and say, one of everything. It was a good time. So I've done that a couple of years running. Last time was with Rachel Gold. Time before that was with Blind Eye, which is a publisher out of Bellingham, Washington, who also put out excellent books, and I recommend them. But one of the things that I was seeing, particularly at the smaller events, and was doing, book festivals at the breweries and that kind of stuff, is that people would, they'd buy things eventually, but they would really gravitate toward things that were in a certain price point if they didn't recognize the author's name. So I realized that I needed something that got into that magic price point of about $8 to $10. So to do that, I needed to have a smaller book, because you can't cover costs with, a 90,000 word trade paperback at that level, generally speaking. You can kind of, but not really. So started doing these. Again, this is another fabulous Terry Roy. You can see it's the front cover, only my logo as a ghost. So we did that one first, and then it was part of a trial run, because in 2020, one of the authors who wrote a story for Scourge of the Seas is an author from New Zealand named AJ Fitzwater. And AJ has won the Sir Julius Vogel Award a couple of times for short fiction. The Vogel Awards are, they're like New Zealand's Hugo, roughly. That's kind of what they correspond to. And in fact, they are up for the Vogel again this year for a different story than the ones that I've published. And as is my web designer, Andy Buchanan. Andy really picked up our website and helped us, install a shopping cart and do a bunch of the stuff that I wanted to do eventually. And Andy's really helped me kind of accelerate through that. So Anyway, AJ wrote this terrific story for Scourge of the Seas about a character named Sinrak, who is a dapper lesbian capybara pirate. And there was a point where I was going through the edits for Scourge of the Seas, and originally when I started out, I thought to myself, well, this will be, a relatively conventional pirate book. We've got some fantasy pirates, we've got some, historical pirates, we've got some stuff in there. And then at a certain point, I was getting things like this terrific post-apocalyptic pirate story set in a flooded New York with pirate taxi drivers. and I looked at that, and then I looked at Sinrak and went, yeah, we're just going to go there. It's going to have a little bit of everything in there. So if you're looking for a book with a lot of variety, Scourge is a great choice. So I went back to AJ, and I knew that there was at least one other Sinrak story out there because I'd seen it. So I went back to AJ and said, hey, are there more of these? Could there be more of these? And AJ said, sure. So AJ went to work and produced a series of 7 linked stories, which are all about Sinrak, and they're all set in a fantastical world of anthropomorphic animals. So there's, a talking squid, and there's mer people, and there's, a trans chinchilla who's the cabin boy on Sinrak's ship. And they're just these lovely, warm, fuzzy hugs of stories. They're, very life affirming. They're very, but they're about joy. The Benj, the chinchilla, is transitioning over the course of the stories, and they're very trans affirming. There's one story that's entirely about them going on a quest to get him facial hair, which is just glorious. So they're just lovely, lovely little stories. And I was at WisCon, as I frequently am most years, and a lovely local artist named works under Ruby Diane Arts, which is how you find them, and I'll post some of this in the chat later, wandered up, and Diane introduced herself, and she said, hey, I like your covers. I'd like to do a cover with you. And I'm like, all right, sure. So I didn't really think about it until like a month or so later, and we started looking for covers. So as it turned out, I'm just going to hold this up for a second. Capybara! So I went out and, we chatted about a few things that were a little more cartoony, and then I went out and looked at Diane's Tumblr, which had a capybara with a star field in it. It looked a little different from this. It didn't have the pirate ship, and there were, some things that I think it was sitting down. It wasn't standing. And so we started to work on this, and Terry ended up coming in and doing the lettering and some of the background stuff as well. So it was a collaborative project, and it is just the most glorious little book. So we have this, nice little islandscapes, and Terry found these little seahorses. Oop, there we go. And it just, it's just a fabulous little book. So it's really been finding its people. Most recently, it had got a really nice review in Publishers Weekly. It's been getting a lot of nice reviews at Nerds of a Feather and a bunch of other sites. It's getting recommended on a lot of the BookTube podcasts. I just last week heard from the American Library Association, and they are considering it for their the Over the Rainbow list again this year. So very excited about that, hoping they pick it. It's, I'm starting to get it out for awards and so forth. And so that's the first book of 2020. The second book of 2020 is If the Creek Don't Rise Any Further. I'm working on a sequel to Silver Moon, which is called Blood Moon, and it will once more feature menopausal werewolves. This one has a bit more of a murder mystery element to it, and it picks up where the first book left off. So I've been working on that for a while. I'm hoping that this is the year. It's been kind of intense, so we'll see. I'm also going to be opening up for submissions in July after I finish working on this particular story bundle. And we'll kind of go from there. I am going to open up for both the minis, which are the linked short stories or novella length works, as well as book length works. And then I'm working on another anthology call, which I'll pull together and post later on in the year. In a perfect world, I would have liked to have tried to do 3 books this year as well. But between one thing and another, So like the last 8 weeks, which have been an amazing time in so many ways. um, my mom died. I was in a car accident. My mom's death was not unexpected. So um, our contractors showed up and announced that they could work on our house right now, but if we didn't let them in right at the moment, they weren't going to come back for another year. So now I have an office space up in the attic, which is really cool. But it meant that the house was under construction for a month, and then we had lockdown, and we had squirrels in the attic roof, and I live in South Minneapolis, and so you've been watching the news, you have some idea of what's been going on here. So it's been a very intense 2 months. So, but I am still writing. Words are still going on the page. I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to make it. I've also been doing, some videos. I teach for Kat Rambo, who's the former president of SIFWA, who runs a series of writing classes off her blog. So I've been working with her. So I teach like every couple of months. I just did a class with her last weekend. Lots of conventions and so forth. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the publicity and marketing things that have gone into building the press. And, go ahead and ask questions, and I'll start, going through things as people, have questions that they want to bring up. So initially, the marketing budget was basically, what I could scrounge up. So I did a lot of stuff with postcards. Like the first year I got the banner done. I didn't have a table banner before then. I just had a drop cloth with, the smaller logo on it. So I started doing a few more things, a few more collaborative projects. I was doing, things like, I would take an author's promo materials with me to one convention. They would, another press the stuff, and they would take my stuff to theirs, and we would kind of trade off. So I was doing that kind of stuff. So second year, I started going a little bigger. I experimented with, Facebook ads and Amazon ads, and, it didn't see much payoff for it. So I think it just was a matter of just not putting enough money into it. And I didn't have the money to put into it, and I didn't think it was the best approach. So I started switching more to targeted advertising. I used to write for a zine called SF Signal, and SF Signal won the Hugo a couple of times. It was a big online site. They do a lot of book promotion. The John DiNardo, who used to run that, now writes for Kirkus. A lot of the people who used to write for that became book bloggers, and they were book bloggers. They're book bloggers at Tor, they're book bloggers at Barnes & Noble's science fiction blog when that still existed, and a whole bunch of other places. So I, stayed in contact with a lot of those folks and offered them free books when I thought that I had a book that they might like, and sent those out to them. So I kind of worked into an interview network that way. And then I also just went out and just talking to people at cons. I just met a lot of people. So I was for a while there doing, I did WisCon, and then I went to Vegas, and then I was doing a steampunk festival in the winter, and then I was doing a couple of other conventions also out of town, and just kind of gradually ramping up what we were doing. So with Sinrac, what we had planned to do was AJ was going to come to the US from New Zealand, and we were going to, basically have a real book tour. They had, scheduled something tentatively in LA around the time of the Nebula conference. They were going to be in Madison for WisCon, and then they were going to go on to New York, and they had something, tentatively set up in New York as well for a reading series out there. And so things were, looking pretty promising. And then COVID-19 hit, and then we had the shutdowns. And the book came out April 1st, so if that gives you an idea. So we had to regroup really quickly and figure out how else we could do this and still make it workable. So, some things went online, some things went away because they just got rescheduled, way far out. I tried to get announcements in for Library Journal and Locus and so forth, but they want print books, and the point at which the print books got there were right at the point where their offices all shut down. So Publishers Weekly, bless their hearts, did get the book and did do a nice review of it, which helped a lot. And we've been kind of hustling it ever since. So there's a tremendous amount of stuff where AJ's just done an amazing job. They've done a couple of videos. We did a video release party. They did a chat on Reddit. They also had another book come out, as a matter of fact, this month, like June 5th, from Paper Road Press, called No Man's Land, which I also recommend checking out. And so there's just been like a tremendous amount of hustling. So AJ's been doing, a big idea and Reddit, and I've been doing stuff. And so between the two of us, we've been kind of juggling things back and forth to try to keep things going and get enough momentum to get the book noticed. And I think we've done pretty well on that. There were things that definitely would have been a lot easier if shutdown hadn't hit when it did, or hadn't hit at all, ideally. And that, made it more difficult to juggle our way through a bunch of stuff that would have been, a lot simpler. For example, I was going to do a release party at WisCon, which is what I'd done with Alex's books. And then I had a table in the dealer's room, and we were going to kind of go from there. So, that part didn't work out. And then it was harder to, when conferences were reshuffling to be online, it was harder to get into the schedules and so forth. But, we managed. And so between the two of us, we've done a whole bunch of events and have really just been, plugging CINRAC and getting the word out. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Well, that will continue to pick up over the course of the rest of the year. Because in many respects, it is very much a book for our time. It's comfort reading for when you really, really need comfort reading. And that is a terrific thing. So this year it's just going to be the 2 books, because I just don't think I can manage 3. But my plan is for next year to have a couple of new things in the pipeline, as well as a new anthology in play. So we'll aim for 3 books next year. 3 books next year with a full-time job is about what I can do without having coronavirus, or norovirus, actually. The other kind of virus. I don't want coronavirus either. But going through all of that was a lot of juggling and was very stressful. So I'm putting in about 60 to 70 hours a week between the press, my day job, writing, miscellaneous other things, and all of that good stuff. So it's, it's easier or harder depending on what else is going on. It's a lot easier now that I'm working from home all the time, in the sense that I don't also have a commute to juggle. So there's, a little more flexibility. There's a little more stuff I can get done because I don't have that extra hour, tacked on at the beginning and the end of the day. But it's, still kind of rocky. So up until lockdown hit and the economy went downhill, we were on track for about 20% growth each year. And this was, again, a tremendous amount of hustling. A lot of stuff went into it. A lot of work went into it. And what that actually meant was not that I was going to be able to pay myself so much as I would be able to stop subsidizing the press directly. And we were close. We were so close. So it's hard to tell what the rest of this year is going to look like. It's very, very unpredictable. Potentially, we might get, we might not take a huge hit. I don't know. I don't really know how that's going to work out yet. But yeah, so the perfect world would be to get to a point where the press doesn't cost me money and then build up from there. Now, I did mention briefly that I now have an assistant. And part of that was because I got laid off last October, but I was originally supposed to get laid off the October before that. And I had a 3-year layoff notice, so I knew it was coming. So I had, prepared for it and, done my thing. And in the course of dealing with that, I thought, hey, I've always wanted to start a small press. This is the time I can do that. So, I did all the financial prep, and I did the scheduling prep, and I figured out how all the stuff was going to work. And then it was like December of 2018, my manager called me into a room and said, well, you know how we said we were laying you off in 3 years? And I said, yes, with a severance package. She said, well, we were just kidding. So I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of the conversation. So I looked at what I had lined up, and I realized that I couldn't successfully do it on my own without paying too high a price in terms of impacts to my own health. So I had met a recent college grad at one of the book festivals, and she'd come from one of the programs up in Morris, I believe, and she'd been working on the Lit magazine up there and some of the small press stuff up there. So she had some experience. She was really interested in the work that I was doing. So I brought her on, and she's now handling our monthly newsletter. She does, schedules her Twitter feed. She's working on some ad campaign stuff. She does some proofreading and works with, a whole series of things that I can, give to another person. And she's been working remotely the whole time. So that, other than our very exciting time just in St. Cloud last year. So we see each other every few months and we touch base and, meet up and go through, what's coming next and what she'd like to do. And the advantage to it is that as I am as a writer, I am also as a publisher. I am something of a pantser, which I'm sure comes across. So I tend to like, oh yeah, let's go do that, So it's really good to have another human being that I have to then go justify this decision to. So that's been really helpful, and she's been terrific. She's been a huge amount of help, and it's really helped out a lot to kind of get things a little more stable. So we got a monthly newsletter. We do quarterly book drawings. I've got the Patreon. We do a yearly group sale. So there's a sale that Emily Byrne participates in that's just, what's called lesfic. It's fiction about lesbian characters, and that's just that one. There's a couple of other things like the story bundle that I've been doing, which is more generally queer. And, so there's been various things that we've been working on. And in addition to that, we have regular sales, and they usually get announced on the site. We've got all the usual platforms. So things are, constantly being broadcast. We've got our own YouTube channel, which this video will end up on at some point. Those of you who've seen some of my previous attempts to do videos will be relieved to know that I just spent part of my teaching money this week on new equipment, so I'm going to have a camera soon and a ring light. I'm very excited about that. So, and now I've got an office space up in the attic, so there's a little more room to spread out and to store things and to find things when I store them. Because previously we were just kind of packing everything into the same office space that had everything in it. It was just getting kind of intense and difficult to make things work. So we're kind of working on a lot of that stuff. We're doing a lot of podcast guesting. So I'm going to be, I just recorded something for the Super Relaxed Fantasy Club, which is a reading series in the UK. And so there's definite advantages to this whole now we do everything remote thing. And let's see. AJ's got something coming up soon, and we're, kind of working on a couple of different things in the podcast realm. And I've got a number of things where I've got some short fiction out on podcasts and so forth, but I'm also getting interviewed in the course of talking about the short fiction. So we've been kind of building from there. And every year sales have been going up, and every year we've got, more traffic on the Facebook, more traffic on the website. The first year we didn't have very many direct sales even after the shopping cart went in, and those have picked up very steadily. Those Sinrak in particular has done really well out there, because I think as word is spread that people are coming to our site and buying directly from us. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, DreamHaven is our local bookstore, so all of our print titles come over here to DreamHaven, and Greg sells them for us too. We do sell some print direct from our website, but please, DreamHaven first. We want to try to support the store and the kind of ecosystem we have around here. Apart from that, there's been a number. We do a lot of tabling at lit festivals. I normally do TC Book Fest, but that not clear if that's going to happen in October or not yet. But the plan at the moment is that I'll be down in Rosemont as well. I did a book festival in Green Bay last year where I was on programming and then was selling books in addition to that. So there's a lot of that kind of activity that's going into kind of building the brand and building awareness of the press and getting people engaged with the stories and the authors and what we're working on. So it's kind of been an interesting transition up in that regard. And one of the things I should mention when I talk about, book sales financing it, I mean that my royalties go directly into the press, which is why there's almost always going to be at least one title with my name on it, simply because that's where a lot of the funding comes from. One of the things I'd like to try to do for this next anthology is try my hand at some crowdfunding and see how that goes, and see if I can, boost things up to a better rate than I was able to pay people for the previous anthology. And we'll see how that goes. That's definitely going to be kind of a new and interesting challenge. One of the things that I've been doing during the course of all of this is taking a lot of different classes and trainings and things. So, I took a class last year through Cat Rambo with Mike Underwood on hand selling at conventions, and worked on developing better pitches for the books. So that was really useful. I've been taking classes on crowdfunding. I've been going to panels and anthologies on how to set up and do it, have a better video presence. So there's a lot of stuff out there that if you're looking at doing small press publishing, or indie press publishing for that matter, that you can take advantage of. A lot of that stuff is free. For example, SIFWA is going to make the Novellas a year-round thing. So there's going to be kind of an ongoing series of videos that are, focus on craft and focus on different aspects of the field and working in the field. The SIFWA blog is free and open to the public. They do pay their authors, so that's kind of handy. I've written for them a few times. I've got some promo stuff out there, and I'll be doing some other things for them soon, I hope. There's also, things like Cat Rambo's classes. She does offer a scholarship. There are some that are free for a certain period of time. I think there were some writing for games classes that were free. There's some other things that are in there. So you definitely want to kind of look around and see what's available to you. In the 2 years that I was ramping up to do this, I was taking classes in things like copy editing, learning how to write my own copy, which has come in very handy. Because one of the things I do when I'm first putting a book together is, after we've gone through, the cover and interior design and edits, I'm pulling together, sign the ISBN, get the author bios, and then I'm pulling together a press kit, which is it's longer than a press release. It's not focused on a specific event, but it's kind of a general introduction to the book. So it's usually got, cover, ISBNs, prices, links to buy, brief description, short excerpts, that kind of stuff. And so I build those into each time that I'm, putting a book out. So my ad copy skills have been going up and up because I'm simply having to learn how to do it over and over and over again. And then there's stuff I'll look at something that I did 3 years ago and go, wow, I wouldn't have done that way today. So there's definitely kind of a learning experience that comes with this, and you have to, try to apply what you're learning as you, go along, and that makes it a lot easier to do better next time. And so it has definitely been an ongoing and interesting adventure, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the next year brings. I'm ideally, in a perfect world, what I'd like to do in the next year or two, if things work out, is I would like to have, like a regional science fiction fantasy, upper Midwest horror line at some point in the future. That would not necessarily have to be, LGBTQ oriented. I don't know that ultimately, like every title we put out is not going to be. That's kind of the long range plan. But it's definitely a focus, and because it's what my writing experience comes out of, it's the area that I know the best. So it made sense to start there and focus on that. But I'd like to kind of grow it out a little bit so that I'm taking in some new things that the basic criteria for what I want to look at when I open up for submissions is, what is Catherine excited about? The reason for that is, of course, that Catherine is doing most of the marketing. So I have to be engaged with the product before I'm going to be able to get it out in the world. And if I like a book, I like a book, and you're going to hear about it. And I'm happy to share, and I'm happy to recommend, and I love telling people about books that I like. So that's, not a problem. And so that's something that I need, that level of enthusiasm. So going forward, that will be probably the main thing that will stand out. 3 or 4 years from now, if I can get to the point where I can bring on, maybe sooner, if I can bring on more people, I could see having, other lines of other things. I've always wanted to have a focus on diversity in titles, and as a wide range of interesting and eclectic books that people just like to really engage with. And I also have a real soft spot for things like swords and pirates and steampunk and dirigibles and whatnot. And that's I don't see us becoming a literary fiction oriented press anytime real soon. But there's a whole bunch of things in there, Gothic ghost stories and just all that kinds of stuff. I just, I like a lot of things and I like them a lot. So I'd like to kind of, play with a lot of that stuff and bring in authors that are telling stories that do kind of interesting and quirky things in those areas. And I love the idea of working with authors who are relatively new. As I mentioned, Cinerac is AJ's first book, and AJ also had a second book out this year, which is the other book that I mentioned from Paper Road Press, and that's No Man's Land. And it's such a great opportunity to work with people when they're at different points in their career. Alex is much more established, has been working with Angry Robot, and has had stuff out on tour and so forth, and so they're just kind of in a different place there. And so you get different kinds of feedback and a different kind of working experience when you're dealing with authors who are in those different places, I think. And of course, I've been at it for a long time. I am that rarest of all things. I am actually a publishing baby. My mother worked for many years in publishing in New York, and so take your kid to work day was all the time. And so I grew up in the offices of what used to be Harcourt, Brace, and Yovanovitch. And so I've spent a lot of time in the offices at Old St. Martin's and a bunch of other places. Mom was working for Random House for a while. So I got to see some of that stuff on the way up. I also used to be I used to have my own bookstore. And so I had a bookstore for a couple of years when I lived down in Iowa before I moved up here. And, that was its own thing. I was just telling Greg that I sat and watched a documentary that was streaming from the Riverview, which is a local theater, last night, a couple of nights ago, called The Booksellers, which is a documentary about rare book dealers in New York. And I came out of it, the first thing I said was, I want to be a rare book dealer. I'm like, no. No, we've already done a version of that. The press is going much better than the bookstore did. So bookstores are hard. Bookstores are very hard. So if you've got local bookstores, and please try to keep them going, because they really need the help and the support. And it's important that indie bookstores in particular be there for indie voices and small presses and so forth. Because that's an opportunity you often don't get with the bigger ones. So, anybody got any questions for me? Anything that they'd like to hear me talk about in particular? I know you're still there. I can see the numbers. All right. So in terms of that's kind of an overview of what's coming up. I've talked a little bit about doing things like establishing. There we are. Have I found various venues to promote the press? How have I found various venues to promote the press? Okay, so Shari is asking, how have I found the various venues to promote the press, and how do I assess these to determine which ones to try, given that realistically I can only try one or two new things at a time? I wish that were true. But I managed to pack in a whole lot of things at a time. But it's been a kind of a learning process in some respects. So for some things, like the first year, I started out with the basic stuff. So Amazon and Barnes and Noble. I go through Smashwords, which is a small indie platform for producing ebooks, in part because really don't like monopolies, and I'm not very fond of Amazon. So, and Smashwords does a decent enough job, and then I do a couple of things separately in addition to that. So the first year was just like all the main stuff. I talked to Greg. I had told him that I was going to be starting up this small press and so forth, and he agreed to take the print books on. So that was like, the first year was pretty much, that's what things look like. Second year, I started branching out and looking for more places to sell. So that was more bookstores. At this point, locally, you can find our titles at the Irreverent Bookworm, at Cream and Amber, at DreamHaven, and also I believe I did an event last year at Room of One's Own Books in Madison, so they have some of our stuff. I did another event last year at Karis Books in Atlanta. They carry our stuff. So it's been kind of a gradual, trickling out into the world. So last year I added a couple of other small indie platforms, including Drive Through Fiction, which is the fiction arm of, it's linked heavily to Onyx Path Publishing that does a bunch of gaming tie-ins and games and so forth. And I also write for them. So I've written for some tie-in stuff for Vampire the Masquerade and some of their other books, and some of their other lines, rather. And they have Drive Through Fiction is a fiction platform for distribution. And it's a nice little indie platform for getting the word out. And so I have a book bundle out there and a few other things out there. And then I started to go out and see what else I could scare up this year, because we published Sinrak, and Sinrak has anthropomorphic animals. I went and I talked to the furry publishers and editors who worked with Ursula Vernon when she was first starting out. You may know her work as T. Kingfisher or as Ursula Vernon, but Ursula Vernon started out doing a web cartoon called Digger. She might have done something before that, but that's the main thing that hit big, and One a Yugo and so forth. And so I started talking to them and getting ideas and asking about places to send things and so forth when Sinrak was coming out, because I thought it would have a crossover audience. And so far it has. It's gotten some nice reviews, and it's been picked up for distribution by Fur Planet, which is one of the big furry book distributors. So that's out in the world doing that. And I'm trying to work on some others as well. I mean, a lot of what I'm looking at is kind of, targeted opportunities that will speak to a different audience. If I could find a store that specialized in steampunk, I would. Otherwise, I tend to go to events and bring, Alex's books and put them front and center and really talk about them. There's, a few other things that I've been kind of gradually picking up. I've been approached about distributing with another small distributor, and we'll see how that goes. I haven't yet followed up on it. So a lot of things, I'm targeting specific titles to specific distributors based on what their readership is. So like I wouldn't send any of our other books to Fur Planet because they just wouldn't cross over into that same audience. There's books of mine that I send one place, but Alex's books just aren't a good fit for it, so I don't send them there. So that's been a lot of it, is just kind of going through and making a determination of what the audience is for something. So some of that is just spending the time to do the research and get familiar with what's out there. So that's pretty much like I said, every year we try at least a couple of new platforms, a couple of new things that we haven't done before. I try to add something new in the way of marketing. So, whether that's, the YouTube channel or it's, something else in that, that area. Those are all things out there that we, kind of play with. And my whole approach to marketing is that essentially a whole bunch of things kind of pick things up. And since there isn't a ton of money to throw at things, I'm, focused primarily on stuff that isn't quite as spendy as, a full page ad in a major magazine or something. So that also helps. So, and Trina is asking, are most small presses run by authors? It really depends. I mean, there's a fair number of those. I know people who are editors but not authors who run small presses. Occasionally you'll run across somebody who isn't either and they just want to, put out books, and often they'll hire other people to do their editing. So it really, it depends. There are a lot of small presses here. There's an organization called the Minneapolis Publishers Roundtable that has a list on their website, and that has a lot of the current publishers. The other publishers, by and large, there's only one other publisher that primarily does LGBTQ work, and that's Squares and Rebels, and they do poetry. And then most of the other presses either do literary fiction, poetry, or children's fiction. That's a really big thing here. There's a couple of others, more general ones. If you go to the Twin Cities Book Festival, when that's an option, Rain Taxi has a list up on their website. There's a whole little booklet of all of the attending presses and everybody who has authors appearing and so forth. And that's kind of like the local stardom. Everybody goes to the Twin Cities Book Festival if you're here. So, even not counting, indie presses that are only doing their own work, there's still quite a few. I'm not even sure of the current count. And then there's, other things out in the suburbs. I know that there's like a couple of small horror presses, elsewhere in the state that I just haven't made contact with because our paths haven't crossed at events and so forth. But there is a lot of stuff out there. And, more particularly if you do things like poetry or writing for children. But lots of variety. Anything else? So, and that's one of the nice things about, being in the upper Midwest, is that there's a whole, range of different things. I mean, here in town, on a normal year, there's multiple science fiction conventions, but then there's multiple fanish events. There's the steampunk events, there's the, the anime events, there's the comic book conventions. Mike and I have done the comic book conventions in the past. There's just a whole, very rich reading population out there to kind of tap into. And then there's also, like, as near as I can tell, on a good year, every city in Wisconsin has some sort of literary festival. So there's the Green Bay one and the Madison one, and then there's one in, like Wausau, and there's, just all over the state. So there's a bunch of different things to kind of choose from. There's also a lot of small indie bookstores in Wisconsin. So there's, a number of places that you can kind of look at when you're looking at places to go and places to, do outreach for things. Now, a lot of them specialize. And so, for example, we have multiple bookstores in the Twin Cities, but of them, we have, we of course don't currently have Uncle Hugo's anymore, but hopefully will again someday. Obviously the same with Uncle Edgar's. But we have things like Once Upon a Crime, which is a great little mystery bookstore, and does a fabulous job with authors, does a lot of great remote events and so forth, and I recommend checking them out. There's general bookstores like Majors and Quinn. There's obviously DreamHaven, Moon Palace. When they hopefully again reopen, they also have they host a lot of book clubs. Bone Shaker, which is the little anarchist bookstore up in Seward, is coming back. They were going to close, and then they did a really successful fundraiser, and so they're planning on reopening. There's, bookstores, in the suburbs. There's bookstores in Stillwater. There's a couple of bookstores in St. Paul. But there's also, a lot of the bookstores specialize in things. So, like Storied Owl tends to be more kids' books. Subtext tends to be more literary and political. You've got, various things that are, kind of the specialties. So there are bookstores that, will look at my stuff and go, yeah, that's not for us. And other bookstores that are like, yay, bring it on. So at this point, I do, at least a couple of events a year here at DreamHaven. I've also done a couple of events at Cream and Amber. Actually, I take that back. We did the book release for the Pirate Antho at Cream and Amber. And they were great. They were terrific to work with, so I heartily recommend them. In January, Irreverent Bookworm had, pretty much just opened, and we went and did the Queen of Swords press birthday party there because they have a lot of space and it's wheelchair accessible, and they have a great kids section, and that was terrific because it was a local event, so a ton of people came in, and people really engaged. Elise Matheson, who made this, who's a finalist for the Hugo Fan Artist Award this year, is a local artist, made a pendant for a drawing just for the birthday. And so we got to do that, and we had tea from my friend's store, Bingley's Tea. And there are Queen of Swords press mugs. Go ahead and ask me about them. They can be for sale, just saying. There are also occasionally giveaways. So if you sign up for our newsletter, that's something else to check out, is that we do give away books and other things as well as books as we go along. And yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much the gist of how some of this has worked. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, but I don't have 60 to 70 hours a week to put into this sort of thing, there's other ways to do it. If I had opted to do more crowdfunding to begin with, for example, that might have covered the cost of the books enough that, it would have been easier to get through launch. But at the time, I wasn't sure if I could successfully pull it off, and I didn't think I had enough of a footprint online. I think that's no longer the case, but for a while there, it was true. So, there's definitely, things you can do. One of the things that's come up a lot when I first started was I was doing some stuff with Women Venture, which is the local arm of the Small Business Administration that works with women-owned businesses here in Minnesota. And they do some good work, and they have some good classes, and I went through their whole training cycle when I first got started. And they walk through like setting up accounts and elevator pitches for your, where you talk about what your business does, and it's a very short form. You've only got a few minutes to get that point across. Basic advertising, a lot of that kind of stuff. And it was valuable, and I appreciated the opportunity to go and do it. But they are an arm of the Small Business Administration, and so one of the things they do is they really, really push getting loans. For certain kinds of businesses, I think loans can be valuable under normal circumstances, and depending on what the terms look like. But honestly, I would probably steer clear of them when it comes to something like small press book publishing, because it's so unpredictable and there's so many ups and downs. It would be really, really hard to be able to predict that you would be able to be profitable enough to be paying down a loan if something went wrong. And I've watched too many people crash and burn on that. So I decided I wasn't going to go that route. But every year I take another workshop on women. Every year I have the same conversation with the Small Business Administration. I'm like, I'm still not going into debt for this, thanks. So what I opted to do was to make it, it pays its own way. It would pay as it go, as things go along. And, I take, a little bit out of each paycheck and just plug it into the accounts. My royalties, like I said, just get channeled right back into it. And that pays for everything for, well, it used to pay for stuff like the P.O. box at one of the post offices that was really badly damaged, so that's out. But that's everything from ads to paying Alexa to do the stuff that I have Alexa doing, to paying Terry to design books and work on covers. That's paying for event tables, for insurance at events, for things like my lovely table banner, promo postcards, little things like book racks, all that kind of stuff. Postage, if I sell print books, or if I'm nominating for an award, or if I'm sending print books out for review, paying my web designer, paying for, memberships and organizations. So right now, Queen of Swords is a member of the Minneapolis Publishers Roundtable. It is a member of the Midwest Publishers Association. It's a member of Quorum, which is the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. So it's in there as well. I also belong to a small organization called Feminist Founders, which is essentially a website link for miscellaneous stuff. And I'm looking at a few other organizational things that I'll gradually join. There were things that I wasn't eligible to join to begin with because I was primarily publishing my own work. And so there's stuff that you can join if you're an indie author, but not if you're publishing other people, and vice versa. So there were a bunch of things in there that I ended up, looking at and going, yeah, not now, not yet, maybe not ever, depending on who else is in it, what else is going on. So I'll be, probably signing up for a few more things there. And that's another way to also kind of get the word out, because you're out and you're networking with other people who are publishers who are, doing at least some of the same things that you're doing. The beauty of working in something like science, in science fiction, fantasy, and horror is it's so fan driven, and you go out and you meet people. It's very, very interactive. Yeah. And a lot of the other, genres aren't necessarily like that, or they're not like that the same way. So you don't necessarily interact with your readers quite the same way. Romance, for example, tends to be, it's a professional level con, and the people who are attending want to be professionals, but it's not necessarily like, here's a broad swath of people who are potential readers, and we're just going to kind of throw them all together and see what happens. So it doesn't have the kind of that same feel to it. Still valuable, just different. Mystery is kind of like that as well, as near as I can tell. So we've got, certain advantages when you're dealing with a field that, taps into that kind of network and environment. That also makes a big difference on how you can do things with small press publishing. How much time do I spend preparing my newsletters? I use MailChimp, and MailChimp is free up to like 1,000 signups. I've got about 350 right now. And at this point, since I'm giving the newsletter to Alexa, what happens is I throw a bunch of stuff together with links and say, okay, all of this, we've got it templated, so we break it down in sections. So the first section is news about the press in general, and then the next couple of sections are about individual authors who have new stories out, new books out, new appearances, that kind of stuff. And then there's a final just kind of boilerplate section that's like, hey, you can get our books at libraries. So that kind of all, works out through there. So it depends on how much stuff I have to go look up and what's going on, but I'd say between the two of us, it probably takes about 2.5 hours. But if you're not also juggling other, multiple authors, then I would, think it would be a whole lot easier. We also, because we have enough going on between us to make it worthwhile to do a monthly newsletter, we do a monthly newsletter. I wouldn't say that I'm a big fan of, I occasionally get on the mailing list for creators that do weekly newsletters, and I just think that's too much. I think most people don't have enough new stuff to talk about at that point. On the other hand, I'm signed up for a friend's small press newsletter, which I was told would come out when they had something to say, and I have yet to see a copy of it. And I know they're doing things, I just haven't seen it yet. So I think some kind of regular schedule for, whatever it is you think you want to put out. You can always start out with something that's, bi-monthly or quarterly to start with and see how that goes. And if you have too many time-dependent things that you need to get out, then, maybe it goes out more frequently after that. But MailChimp's been pretty good. I'm, as far as I know, Constant Comment and Tiny Letter are also perfectly fine. And the people I know who use those like those too. So I think there's a couple of other options out there. So. Anybody else? Or Shari, again, feel free to ask more questions. I sense that I'm going to look at this later and go, I played with my glasses all the time and then I drank water, So we'll see how that goes. So I've decided to look on our video experiences as they are utterly candid and unedited, and that's just the route we're going to go. Oh, that's actually something else that Alexa does, is that she also, when AJ or Alex or I post videos for the YouTube channel, Alexa, who's my assistant, also goes through and does edits to those And in this last year, she's been gradually adding subtitles. So we have much better subtitles than the standard ones you get with YouTube. And those work pretty well if we're not kind of ad-libbing. It's a lot harder to do that when, I'm talking off the top of my head, but, for something where I can hand her and say, it's this chunk of this story, that makes it a lot easier to get the subtitles done. So most of the videos on our YouTube channel are in fact subtitled. And they're also cross-linked to our website. So if you go out to the website and you look under a different authors' names, you can see our the videos of different readings from various books. So it gives you an idea of what things sound like and whether or not you'd be interested in it. Printing. Okay, so printing goes through Ingram. Ingram Spark is one of the really, really big book distributors, and they have an arm that does print-on-demand printing. In a perfect world, I would like to get to the point where I was able to do offset printing, and then I'd be looking at something local, like maybe Bookmobile or something, but something in the area where I could go and just order in a bunch of books. Now, one consideration in not doing this previously was that we had no storage space. There's just nowhere to put stuff while I tried to get it out in the world. I also wasn't very confident of my sales skills and how well I could get print books out into the world with that kind of frequency. And I didn't really want to have boxes and boxes of stuff sitting around for, long periods of time. So on average, there's probably about 20 to 30 books in our office, but there's not like 12 cases of books that have, been sitting there for 2 years or something. So I like Ingram. They're kind of futzy on the upload of files, and they will occasionally, kick back about really bizarre things about the CMYK formatting and so forth. Again, because I'm farming out the book design to somebody else, Terry takes care of that for me. So she generates a file, and, with the design elements, and then I upload it. And so that's been extremely helpful because I haven't had to deal with that aspect of things otherwise. And so I upload the files. It's $49 to do that. It's an additional $85 if you want your book listed in the catalog that comes out like once or twice a year. I do that because it does get it out to libraries and some like Powell's Books in Portland and places like that. Ingram is a really interesting distributor. I don't quite understand how things get where they get sometimes, but my previous publisher used them, and I was pretty impressed with both the quality of the books, because they're, so far, any time they've messed up, they've made good. So in 3.5 years, I have not had any significant problems that they have not fixed. I've had a couple of bad prints, but they were like, turned it around right away, and I got clean books that I could then reuse. The distribution is kind of wild. So like our books are available in Singapore and India and a whole bunch of places that, Scandinavia, lots and lots of other, interesting locations around the world, primarily with English-speaking book buying markets. But so we've got, our books are available in New Zealand, in Canada, in Australia, in Europe, but also, some other places that I wouldn't have necessarily expected. And then just like weird stuff, like Target carries a couple of our titles. They carry this. Why? I have no idea. This one is not one of the books that's had a ton of reviews. It's not out as many places, and yet you can order that from Target. You can also get Murder on the Titania from Target, but none of our other books are out there. Walmart, on the other hand, does carry like pretty much everything, I think, except for the one Emily Byrne title. So it's kind of, been interesting. But so Ingram gets our books out into Bookshop, which is a new online platform that I think the American Booksellers Association is going to move to. And they're an online print bookstore that donates a portion of their proceeds to independent bookstores. So either the bookstores can set up their own little, area within Bookshop, or authors and other people can set up their own, areas in there as well. I know people who do book reviews who have their own stores within Bookshop. And it's, just kind of helps get the word out. You can have your own, resource lists and reference lists and so forth. Up till now, the American Booksellers Association has been using a different format where they have a different platform called IndieBound. And IndieBound has always been clunky as crap. It's really hard to deal with. It's hard to find things. It's just not the best. And I assume that they got into some kind of contract with IT services somewhere, and that's what they got. Bookshop is a much nicer platform, so I think we'll be seeing more of that. They're still sort of sorting out ebooks as they can be ordered by independent bookstores. So right now, in order to get an ebook through an independent bookstore, they pretty much have to have a program with Kobo, which is one of the other big ebook distributors. But that's kind of changing, and there's something new. I've seen it called Zebra, and I've seen it called Z-Trail, and I just sent our books to them, so I'm waiting for them to upload. Once that happens, it will be possible, because right now, if the bookstore is not on Kobo, you can't get our ebooks. You can get our print books ordered in through your local indies. And what they'll do is they'll get it out in their catalog, and at that point, the bookstores that do, indie bookstores, brick and mortar bookstores like DreamHaven that do ebook sales will be able to tap into that market. And I'm assuming that the ABA is going to move to that. Previously, Baker and Taylor had like an ebook program, and Baker and Taylor decided they essentially were just going to do textbooks, and so that got shut down. So a number of small indie bookstores lost their ebook platforms that way because they either couldn't afford or didn't want to go to Kobo. So that's something that's kind of shifting. And the reason I found out about it was when Publishers Weekly did the review of Sinrack. They had these links, and I'm like, where are these buy links going? What are these things? I don't even know. So, I started working with them to try to get, make sure our books were out in those channels as well, to try and get things out there. And so it's kind of, like I said, it's sort of gradual lift. Each year we expand a little further and a little further and a little further. And I like to hope that that's going to continue. So, all right. Any other questions? And, if you think of something else, you can always reach out to me. I answer, anything that comes in through my page, or the Queen of Swords Press page for that matter. So if you think of a follow-up, publishing related question, just send it my way, and I'll make sure that it gets answered. Yeah, so. Okay. Are we done? No more questions? Kind of want to give everybody like the last few minutes. Okay, so I put this out at the beginning. Like I said, please consider buying books from DreamHaven. They have comics, they have art, they have books. It is a lovely, lovely place. It is filled with great things. On a normal year, they also... another question. Okay, I'll get back to that in a second. On a normal year, they also host a regular reading series for science fiction and fantasy and horror authors, and that takes place about once a month here. And hopefully that will, once again come back, or we'll find an alternate way of doing that one for a while, and we'll get to revive that because it's a really fun tradition and has a nice community feel for it, and people get to discover new writers and all that good stuff. Any international sales that have been particularly surprising? I think just kind of the length and breadth of, where things show up. Like, we occasionally get sales in Japan. Occasionally, get sales on a couple of the larger ebook platforms in Sweden, like I said, New Zealand, Italy, a couple of other places where I wouldn't necessarily expect books to turn up. Had a couple of sales in India, which is really cool. One of the authors in Scourge of the Seas is from India, so I think that's partially why we get a little bit of lift there. Is that people have seen the books and are somewhat familiar. But yeah, no, honestly, I mean, the biggest surprise I think so far has been Target, just because they're not, Walmart has been trying to break into Amazon's terrain for a while. So they've been trying to really work it so that they've got a foothold in books. So there's been a push in the last couple of years where Walmart is suddenly carrying a lot more books online than they used to. Target, on the other hand, has always been kind of, I don't want to say clueless, but not focused on books. Let's go with that. So yeah, I was very, very surprised to discover you could now get at least even a couple of our titles at Target, and it's, they haven't approached me as a local bookseller, so it's not the hometown advantage here. They have no idea. Nobody's ever talked to me about carrying books at Target, but they do. But yeah, so it's been kind of the great gradual trickling out into the world. And so I've posted a website. If people are interested, this is the story bundle that I mentioned that we're working on this month. And this has a bunch of great stuff in it. And as I said, we're raising money for Rainbow Railroad, which works with LGBTQ refugees around the world. They help get people, reestablished and out of danger when they can, and they need all the help they can get to do that. So we do this as an annual thing each year, and it happens to be right around now, so it's the June event. And for upcoming events, this next weekend, I will be at a new online convention for LGBTQ writers and readers called Rainbow Space Magic. And I'm looking for the link for that one. Let's see. Sorry, I should have pulled that one up earlier. I didn't think about it. And so that's going to be completely online. It'll be through Zoom. So if you're interested, I recommend that you sign up for it. And it's just, sorry. So that'll be all of next weekend. And I mean, it's not running the entire weekend, but there's a bunch of things going on that you can check out. I'll be doing a reading, and there'll be a couple of panels as well that are looking pretty interesting. So again, that is Rainbow Space Magic, and there we go, found it finally. And there's a group on Facebook that you can sign up for alerts and information if that sounds interesting. Personally, I just love the name, and that's part of the attraction. And then Queen of Swords is, thank you, Shari, and great questions. And then I will be a vendor. Queen of Swords Press will be a vendor at Twin Cities Virtual Pride, which is the weekend after this. And we will have a book table, and we will be able to sell you books directly from there. So that's kind of cool. And so, yeah, let's see if, so just keep an eye out here. They're doing featured vendors. So this is the, so yeah, so that's the rest of June's events for me. AJ's doing another couple of things coming up still. And so there'll be lots of opportunities. If you follow our page, you follow our newsletter, we'll be, posting the videos and posting the various podcasts and all of that good stuff. And yeah, so then, July is mostly going to be a teaching month with some other odds and ends thrown in. So we'll see how that goes. And yeah, I want to knuckle down and finish my novel and work on other stuff. And so that'll be mostly, what'll happen in July. It's kind of light on events. And it was going to involve going to New Zealand for Worldcon, but unfortunately that's not going to happen. So, I'll be around for virtual Worldcon. And yeah, small bit of advice based on experience so far. If you're going to sign up for an online convention and they're doing any kind of chat elements, you want to see that they're using either Discord or Slack for the chat elements, because it works a lot better than any of the other platforms thus far. The best con I've been to so far that switched to being virtual is something called Flights of Foundry. And that's a brand new convention out of Chicago. It took place in April, and it ran like a dream. It was, considering that they threw it together in like a month, it was amazing. They did a really great job with programming. They did a really great job with handling how they integrated chats and Zoom and all the different platforms, and I really recommend it. So they're going to be doing that again next year. So that so far has been the best one, followed closely thereafter by SIFWA's Nebula Award Weekend, which was also very good. Lots of very informative panels if you're looking for, craft panels or specific panels on things like, what kind of equipment do successful podcasters use, that kind of thing. That's a really good place to get that kind of information all at once in a, science fiction milieu. So far, those have been the two best online conventions. I'm really hoping that, Rainbow Space Magic makes it up there too. And we'll see how the Worldcon online goes. This will be the first time they're trying that. I think it'll be really interesting to see how that, kind of pans out. And I'm hoping that we can do some more things with, with AJ and, AJ's books, remotely at least, if not in person. So yeah, and then, later on in the year, there'll be some more stuff. I'm a guest at Multiverse in Atlanta in October, and that's still on the schedule, so I'll wait and see how that goes. I went to the first Multiverse last year, and it was terrific. I had a great time. They had a great lineup of guests, lovely people, lovely convention. Cannot recommend it enough. Still on the schedule, looking at, TC Book Fest, looking at some of the other events that are floating around, and we'll see how it goes. Usually there's a Minnesota Women's Art Festival as well in December. They're still deciding what they're going to do. Usually my wife and I table together. She's a book artist, so we have the old books all the time table. So we'll see what happens with that. And then next year, who knows? What I expect to have happen is that there's going to be a lot more integration of virtual and live events. So I think even when there is a live event, there'll be a virtual component to it, which is going to make it a lot easier than trying to, travel all over the place. And I think that ultimately will be a good thing, because there'll be more participation, and it'll be easier for people who wouldn't otherwise be able to participate to be part of it. But we'll see how that all goes, and we'll see what happens next. So thank you all very, very much for coming tonight. And thank you, Greg and DreamHaven, for hosting us. And, again, please support DreamHaven, and, hey, sign up for our newsletter. Join us too. And yeah, so I hope to do something else again soon, and have a great evening.